Hey there, you guys. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the research process. I've had a few different people ask me about this recently, and it sounds like the research process is actually feels pretty complicated for some people. And so what I thought we could do is to do a review on it so that it feels a bit more accessible and a little bit easier to follow. Because actually, I think that when you go through it, that it'll make a lot of sense to you. Okay? So the research process that we're going to follow is actually very similar to the scientific method, okay? So what we're going to do is that we're going to start off with our research question. I had a writer that I talked to yesterday, and she said, hey, I think I'm all ready to go because I've got my thesis statement. And I said, well, wait a second, I didn't think you did your research yet. And she said, oh, yeah, I know, but I've got my thesis statement. And I thought, oh, no, we have to start all over again. Because what you do is you don't start off with your thesis statement before you do your research. What you start with is actually your research question. And your research question can be related to whatever it is that you want to find out or whatever it is that you're going to write about in your particular piece. If this is an essay or if it's a blog post or if it's an article or whatever that's going to be, you're going to start with that research question first, okay? So you start off with that research question, and that might be something like, how did Marilyn Monroe's career get started? Or it might be related to what were the technological advances during World War II? Or it might be something like, why did fashion change for women so much during the 1920s? Whatever your topic's going to be, it doesn't really matter, but you're going to start with a question. You're not going to start with a statement first, okay? So you start off with that research question, and then what we're going to do is we're going to follow something that looks like the scientific method, where we start with a question, and then we're going to go to the research, okay? So with that question in hand, now you need to start researching into that question. Like, I've got this, this question about women's fashion changing in the 1920s, okay? So this is the question that I'm going to research. I want to find out about this because this is what I want to write about. Okay, great. So you start with that question. So then you start doing that really broad research. Okay, that question is going to be really broad at the beginning point, and then it's going to narrow over time. Now, depending upon the size of the piece that you intend to write, will determine how much you're going to narrow down that question. Okay, so for example, if you're going to write this really huge piece, maybe you're going to write a 20-page paper, or maybe you're going to write a whole novel or a series of pieces, and they're all going to be on this topic. So that means you're going to actually do a lot of research. And you're going to actually keep your topic more broad, because as you're keeping that topic more broad, what you're going to do is that you're going to cover a lot of subtopics within that. Okay. If you're writing a smaller piece like a 3 to 4 page paper, or a 4 to 5 page paper, or an 8 to 10 page paper, those are actually pretty small papers, okay? I know it may not seem like it, especially if you're not used to writing to that length, but those are actually pretty small papers, okay? So if you're writing a paper that's smaller, let's say a 4 to 5 page paper, what you're going to do with that is you're going to actually take that topic, take that question, and you're going to narrow that thing down as you're doing your research. Okay, so you start off with your research question, and then you start into doing the research where you're trying to find out information around this topic. Okay, so you may start off with something really broad, like what was fashion for women during the 1920s? And then as you are researching, you're finding out information around this. It was the era of the flappers, and so much had changed around economics, and a lot had changed around women's rights and so forth, and that women got the right to vote and such. Okay. So we have all these changes happening, and as we're getting this information, our topic is becoming more and more and more narrow, to where we may come down to just covering a paper on the flapper dress, which is that like really straight dress that sometimes had the fringes at the bottom and had a very straight shape to it, right? Kind of almost like a masculine shape to it, right? It didn't have big curves and so forth. Okay. So maybe that topic is then going to get smaller and smaller. It's going to become more narrow as you're doing your research. All right. So you're doing your research, and as you're doing your research, which is where you've got that research question, and then you're going in and looking for sources that have information around that question, and that topic is narrowing, you're taking notes this whole time. Okay. The kinds of things you want to take notes on: one, keep track of your sources. Okay. I know that sounds a little bit silly, but it's really important. Because you might think, oh, I'll remember what websites I went to, or I'll remember what books I grabbed from the library, or what articles I was reading. And I'll tell you right now that you won't. You will not remember. It's not going to happen. Okay. And so instead of taking the chance, just write down the information around the sources that you're accessing. Okay. You're going to want the same kinds of information regardless of what kind of source that you're looking at. Okay. So you want to know your author, you want to know the title of the piece, you want to know the publication or the publisher of the piece. That's your absolute basic minimum. Okay. If you're looking at online sources, definitely collect a URL for every source that you're looking at. Okay. That's going to be super important. Don't skip that step. I know it may seem like, oh, I'll just come back to it. It'll be no big deal. It's a really big deal. And what will end up happening is that, and this has happened a couple of times, is where I'll talk to a writer and they'll say, well, I had all these great articles, but then I lost them and I can't find them again to be able to put together my works cited page or to be able to come back and re-reference this information. That's a real situation that happens. So make sure that when you're taking your notes, you're collecting the information around these sources and what's in them. The other thing that you want to do is that you want to take notes on the information itself. Okay. You want to come up with your main points. You want to come up with your supporting evidence. You want to come up with any kinds of information that you want to paraphrase within your writing and anything you want to quote within your writing. Okay. Remember that you're only going to use a quotation when the way that it was stated by that particular writer is so perfect, is so good that you can't possibly paraphrase it, right? Like there are some, just spectacular writers out there where, gosh, the way that person phrased that, I can't paraphrase that in a better way. I've got to use this quote. That's a situation where you want to use the quote. Make sure that you get that down and make sure that you get it exact too. Don't change it around unless you intend to paraphrase it. Okay. So write down all of your information around your sources. Where did you get the source? What's the information for the source, the author, and the title of the piece in the publication, publisher, and so forth. Okay. Make sure that you collect all of your main points. Make sure that you're collecting your supporting points, and make sure that you're collecting your information on anything you want to quote, anything that you want to paraphrase. Okay. There are typically 4 different places where we're going to use an in-text citation in our body paragraphs. Okay. And so you want to watch out for these and make sure that you're collecting good information around these kinds of things. One is where you're quoting someone directly. So someone's got this great line and you're like, oh, I've got to put that in there. It's so important. Okay, so we've got a direct quotation. We want to collect the exact information around that direct quotation. Number 2 is when you're paraphrasing information. So you're reading an article and it's got this whole paragraph that's fantastic, but you just want to squish that information down into a single sentence. Okay, you can definitely do that. Paraphrasing, right? We're taking someone's words and we're going to squish it down, right? And rephrase that in a different way. We need to cite that source within our body paragraphs using an in-text citation. So make sure that you collect that information. Another thing you're going to do, another time that you're going to use an in-text citation is when you are borrowing someone's data or statistics. So anytime that someone has, whatever that data or statistics is going to encompass, with our topic around 1920s fashion, maybe we're going to look at how the fashion industry grew the economy during that time period or something like this, or how fashion became so much more important to women. And so women started spending a lot more money on fashion, right? Spending more money on their clothing, but also on their shoes and handbags to match and all of that kind of thing. Okay. If that's the case, you're going to collect that data and statistics. Make sure that you're collecting the information of where that information is coming from. And when I say collecting the information, make sure that you're getting the page number, because if we're going to use MLA citations, we want to make sure that we get that page number down. That's important with MLA citations. Okay. And then so we've done a direct quotation. We've done where we've paraphrased information, okay? We've done where we've borrowed someone's data or statistics. The other one is where we're borrowing someone's ideas, okay? So maybe we're not necessarily going to paraphrase the outcome information that they have in their piece, but we like the ideas that they're sharing there, and we want to make sure that we're including that into our own writing. That's fine. You can definitely do that, and make sure that you cite the source. Okay, same thing. Make sure that you're collecting all of your information so that you can put that into your works cited page, but then also make sure that you're collecting page number and your writer's name specifically so that you can include that in your in-text citation. Okay. So going back to our research process, we started off with our research question. We went in to do our research. We collected information and we made sure that we collected specific information around how to cite sources for our in-text citations. Okay, we've taken our notes. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take all of those notes, all of that information, we're going to put it into an outline. Yes, there are different kinds of graphic organizers that you can use. And if you're a person who's really dedicated to a particular kind of graphic organizer, like using 3x5 cards or something like that, that's fine. Go ahead and use what works for you. But make sure that whatever you're using actually works. And I know that sounds a little bit silly to hear because you're like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to use something that's actually going to work. But that's not what really happens. Because oftentimes what happens with writers is that they'll collect all this great information from their research and then they'll go to put that into an outline and they'll have like 3 or 4 things in their outline. They're like, all right, done, moving on with my day. That doesn't work. What you really need to do is you really need to take all of that information that was in your research, everything that you took notes on, and put all of that into the outline itself, okay? An outline that just has a few little bits and pieces, or another kind of graphic organizer that just has a few little bits and pieces, that's not helpful to you in any way. You've got to have that depth and breadth of content in there so that you can use that outline to keep you on track. So why do we do outlines in the first place? And you can replace the word outline with 3x5 cards or some other kind of graphic organizer if you like to, that's fine. Well, we use that because it's really important to help us stay organized. Okay, especially as you start writing longer and longer pieces, it's harder to stay organized. It really is. When I was in undergrad, when I was in college, I made lots of mistakes around just letting my organization fall apart. So what would happen is that I'd start with my paper here and I'd have this great idea of what I wanted to write about. And then I'd go down some crazy bunny trail and I'd end up in some other place completely. And it's because as I was writing, I was thinking and I was coming, oh yeah, that's a great idea. I want to write about that too, blah, 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 blah. Right? So I'd start putting all this information down, but I wasn't staying on topic, right? I was becoming really distracted and ending up down this crazy bunny trail that ended up creating this really messy paper that I'd end up having to go back and rewrite. So after doing this a couple of times, I realized this is a mess and I can't keep doing this. I need to change my ways of what I'm doing here. One of my professors suggested you really need to start using an outline so you can stay on track. And I thought, oh, duh, of course I do. I've learned about outlines. I knew about it. I just wasn't using it. So I started using the outline and it helped me enormously, especially as I got into writing those larger papers. Larger papers being anything that's like kind of 10 pages or longer, okay? As you're doing those larger papers, you really have to stick to that outline because it's just too much information to try to keep collected without having it on paper, without having it in an organized format, okay? So make sure that as you're writing, as you're before you're preparing to do that rough draft, that you are using an outline or some other kind of graphic organizer that's going to help to keep you on track, okay? So do that. You put together your outline, okay? You've got that outline really well written out. I would suggest that, and this is just to give you an idea of about how much information should be on that outline. I would suggest that you've got something like 3 to 5 items on your outline for each paragraph that you will write in your paper, okay? So about 3 to 5 items on the outline for each paragraph in your paper. So for example, if you know that you need to write a 5-page paper, that's going to be approximately 10 paragraphs. Maybe it's going to be longer, maybe it's going to be shorter, okay? But then what you're going to do with that is that you're looking at doubling the number of paragraphs you have per page. Ish, right? It's approximate because sometimes your paragraphs are a little bit shorter and sometimes they're a little bit longer. But that's just a general guide to help get you going. Okay, so if you're going to use do a 5-page paper, then you want to have about 10-ish paragraphs. And so that means you're going to have 30 to 50-ish items that are written down on that outline. Okay, again, it's just a general guide, something to get you started, something to give you some ideas for making some forward progress with that. Okay, so going back to our research process, we start off with the research question. We go in to do our research itself. We're collecting information. We're taking notes on all of that. We're then organizing all of that into our outline. And then we take that outline and we use that. We have that right there with us as we're doing the rough draft. Okay. writing down that rough draft. Yes, I know that everyone says, oh, your rough draft can be super messy. Don't worry about spelling and organization and punctuation and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you can definitely blow those things off if you want to. But I would strongly recommend that you are putting some serious thought and consideration into your organization and your content. Your content being your ideas as you're doing that rough draft. It's not such a big deal to worry about your spelling and punctuation quite yet. But if you're disorganized and you have your ideas all mixed up, and your ideas aren't explained with thorough depth and breadth of content, when you're doing that rough draft, it's going to make your editing and revising steps much more complicated. So I would strongly recommend to every writer that when you're doing your researching, when you're doing that rough draft, think about, how am I organizing? And am I getting all of my content down? Am I getting that depth or breadth of content in that rough draft? Okay, it's going to save you some heartache later on. Then you've got your rough draft down. I would suggest that your rough draft meets the quantity, maybe not the quality yet, but the quantity of what your final draft is supposed to be. So for example, if you're supposed to write a 5-page paper and it's supposed to have a works cited page and it's supposed to have in-text citations in all of your body paragraphs, put that into your rough draft. Okay? So make sure that your rough draft has the introduction paragraph, you've got those body paragraphs. In those body paragraphs, you've got all of your in-text citations, and then you've got a conclusion paragraph at the end, and then you've got a works cited that's in MLA format. Make sure that you're putting all of those things in there, okay? It'll save you heartache later on. You can trust me or you can figure it out yourself. Either way, I think you'll come to the same conclusion that it really is worth it to take the time to go ahead and do that. Okay, then when you've got that rough draft down, now you're going to go through the long slog through the process of editing and revising. Editing and revising, these processes can be longer than all the other steps in the writing process, in the research process. Okay, and the reason is because you have to look at how you're taking this rough draft and how you're going to polish it into making it into a perfect, shareable, publishable final piece, right? You're going to share this for credit with a professor. You're going to publish this into a magazine. You're going to share this out with the world. You're going to share this with work colleagues. Whatever this is going to look like, you really want that thing to be beautiful, right? You really want it to demonstrate the total quality and quantity of information that you came up with around this particular topic, okay? Now, as you're doing that rough draft, one of the things that you're going to find is that this is the time where you finally put that thesis statement in there, okay? And so as you're doing that, what you'll find is that your thesis statement didn't come first. It was your research question that came first. You did all that research, right? Came up with all this information. Wow, look at all this information I've got. Your research is what leads you to your thesis statement, right? Your thesis statement is your arguable opinion that you will prove within your paper or attempt to prove within your paper, okay? It does have to be arguable and it does have to be an opinion, okay? That's going to go into your introduction paragraph as you're doing that rough draft, okay? And then everything in your paper, all of the information that you're including in there will be supporting that thesis statement. Now, of course, you can also put in contradictory information, like, you know, this researcher over here says this information and that contradicts the thesis statement, and then refute that, you know, give a rebuttal to that information. And here are the 5 reasons why we're disagreeing with that, because we've got this, you know, this researcher over here who also has this information and is refuting that. Okay, so you can explain that in your paper. With that rough draft in place that does for the first time include your thesis statement, now you're going to go into your editing and revising processes. So what that looks like, one of the things that happens is that sometimes writers think, oh, that just means I check for my spelling and I'm done. I just run it through a spell check and I'm finished. That is definitely not what happens. The first thing that you want to do is you want to take a look at those higher order concerns, okay? Higher order concerns are your things like your organization and your content. Your content are going to be your ideas, okay? Do you have a flow of ideas from the beginning of your paper, your introduction, down to the conclusion of the whole thing? Does this thing make sense? Is there a logical connection between the research that you collected and your thesis statement? Is your research supporting your thesis statement? Is your thesis statement stated in a manner that really makes sense to pull all of this research together. Because, of course, one of the things you're doing when you're doing the synthesis and analysis is you're taking information from all of these different sources and then you're pushing them into one paper, right? And so to be able to do that, you have to use a lot of good organization to make that make sense. All right. So you want to make sure that that's happening when you're going through and doing your editing. Sometimes you have to take a step back from your paper and look at it a little bit more critically and a little bit more objectively. One of the things that happens to us as writers is that oftentimes we get really connected to our writing. We'll become emotional about our writing. We'll feel like, wow, this is, I worked really hard on this. So that must mean it's good. And that's definitely not the case. Okay. I oftentimes have writers come to me and say, but I worked really hard on this. And it's like, yeah, awesome. But if it's not good, it's not good. We can work really, really hard on a piece and it could still turn out to be a mediocre piece at best. That happens to all of us. Okay. It happens to the best of us. So one of the things that you have to do is to recognize that however hard that you worked on that piece is not a determiner of the quality of the piece in the end, okay? It's how that piece is going to be received and how that's going to communicate to your audience. That's the determiner of the quality of that piece in the end. So for example, if I work really, really hard on this paper and I'm writing about quantum physics, which I know absolutely nothing about, but I worked really, really hard on this paper. But then an actual quantum physicist comes along and is like, yeah, this is goop and it doesn't make any sense. I may have worked really hard, but the quality, the outcome of my piece isn't there. And so the quality of my piece isn't there. So I would have to go back and rewrite that, probably start from the beginning if somebody actually said that it was goop. So something to take into consideration. It's not about how hard you work. It's about the quality of that piece in the end. Okay. So through your editing process, what you're going to do is you're going to start off with those higher order concerns. Look at your content, look at your ideas, look at the flow of information throughout your piece, look at your organization. Once you've got those handled, then you're going to move to your kind of moderate concerns, okay? You want to look at your writing style, make sure that your formatting is in, make sure that you've got those bits and pieces. Is this in the right tone? Is this in the right voice? Are you using your formatting correctly? Do you have your in-text citations in the correct format and so forth? Okay, make sure that you're getting those bits and pieces. Those are what I might call the medium order concerns. Okay, so that it reads well. When you take that piece and you read 2 of those pages out loud to another person, to an audience, does it make sense? Does it connect? Does that person get it? Is all of this flowing really well? You want to look at those things. And then you're going to look at your lower order concerns. Your lower order concerns are your grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Okay? Your name. Did you put your name on it? Those kinds of things. You're going to do those at the end. Those are lower order concerns. And those are lower order concerns because if you have a piece of writing that doesn't make any sense, it doesn't matter how good that your capitalization is. It just doesn't, because your paper is not making any sense, right? So we've got to make sure that we've got a paper that makes sense, that's well organized, that has great content. And then we want to move to that middle place of where we can get that flow and where it looks right on the page, right? So we have our formatting down. We want to have that flow, that tone, that voice, and that style. Make sure that those are all in really good shape. And then we're going to go to our lower order concerns, capitalization, spelling, punctuation, all of that kind of stuff. Okay, get all of our mechanics in. Once we have all of that done, we want to do that final review. I always recommend that people take their writing and put it away for a bit. Depending upon your deadline that you're looking at, that will determine how much time that you have to put it away. Sometimes you can put it away for a few hours. Sometimes you can put it away for a day. Sometimes if you've got an extended deadline in your way ahead, you can put it away for a few days or even a week or something like that before you go back and do that final edit. When you do the final edit, one of the things that I would recommend you doing is you do an out loud reading. I know it feels a little bit weird to read your writing out loud, but I think it's really important. I think it makes a big difference. You'll be able to hear where you have the good quality in your writing and where it's lacking. You'll be able to hear that in your own voice, okay? If you can read that to a colleague, a peer, someone else, I think that it can make a big difference. So try to do that. If you don't have anybody at all that you can read this out loud to, read it to your cat, okay? Just so that you can get your own voice to read those pieces and you'll be able to find some of those mistakes. There is absolutely a difference in reading a piece to yourself aloud and reading a piece to another person aloud. You'll find more mistakes, more areas that need honing in on the writing by reading it to another person out loud. But if you don't have another person, read it to your cat. That'll work too, just not quite as perfectly. So you're going to go through and then you're going to do all that fine tuning, make sure that you're double checking against the publication guidelines, make sure that you're checking it against your assignment requirements, make sure that you've followed everything exactly as it was expected to be followed before you share it. You want to really try to make sure that things are as close to perfect as you can get them before you're sharing it out. And that's if you're sharing it for publication, if you're sharing it with your peers, if you're sharing it with colleagues, whatever that's going to look like. Okay, you want to make sure that it's as close to perfect as it can be. And yes, I know that no piece of writing is ever totally finished, right? Because writers always want to get in there and like, oh, I just want to move a couple of words around. I know how we are. I know that we always want to jump in there and like just do a little bit more work on it or change things around a little bit, or, later on we'll come up with different ideas. This is kind of the way that we operate, right? Is that we'll always come up with another idea. So sometimes it's really not being about actually perfect. It's about being, this is the perfect version for now. And that is good enough to go ahead and turn in. Okay. If you have any questions, reach out to me. But otherwise, I hoped that this information was helpful to you about reviewing the research process, looking at everything where we start off with our research question and we go to the point of where we have this completed draft that's then ready to share, however that sharing looks. And hopefully all of that information is really valuable to you. I hope it was. And good luck with your writing. Take care.